Hi guys, welcome back to the Library of Alexandria. And today I will be reviewing Boosh, The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. And this is book one in the Women of Troy trilogy. And I read this on a whim, and I picked it up on a whim. My wife and I went on our first date since my car accident a couple weeks ago, and we went to the Barnes & Noble out where we were. It's about an hour away because we don't have a Barnes & Noble in my town. We just have a crappy Books A Million where there's actually no books to read. It's Books A Million. They have a million copies of 3 different books, and that's basically it. But anyway, so we're walking around, and we did not drive, like all the way out, because where we're going to eat and where the play we were going to see is only like 45 minutes away. So we drive another 15 minutes past it to get to the Barnes & Noble, and we didn't drive all that way and leave early to not get anything. So I'm just wheeling around the bookstore. And I happened to see this over in, I don't know what I was looking for. I think I was in historical fiction. I was looking for historical fiction. Anyway, I was looking for Cornwell books. And, Barker is before that. And so I saw it, and I remember my friend Charmaine, who really, really liked this book, and the brothers Gwynn talking about how good it was. And so I picked it up, and I looked, and it was less than 300 pages, which is always a plus in my book. And so I just grabbed it. I grabbed it, and a book about the Peloponnesian War, which delights me. And so when I finished the pages I needed to read for Shogun for January, I said, you know what, this book probably won't take long to read. It's about the Iliad. It's first person, which I tend to read a little faster. So why not? And so I read it. So without wasting any more time, let's get down to business. Let's talk about my thoughts of Silence of the Girls. So this is the Iliad, but told from mostly the perspective of Briseis, who is the war prize of Achilles' sack of wine after taking one of the cities around Troy that are part of the larger Trojan Empire at large. And she is taken from the very beginning. We see Achilles and the Greeks besieging her city, sack of wine, and she is taken captive and divvied up as part of the spoils of war. And her main role in the Iliad, in the actual Iliad, is the fact that she is what causes this rift. I'm speaking in the exact same terms as the Greeks in here. She is what causes. What causes it is that Achilles and Agamemnon are frickin' twerps who need to get over themselves. Sack of wine. But they fight ostensibly over her, because Agamemnon has to give his prize back because she's the daughter of a priest of Apollo, and he refused to give him back, even though everyone was like, hey, you should give her back to her dad. And Apollo sent a plague, and Agamemnon is all cheesed off because now, I don't have someone, and whatever. And so he takes Achilles' because he's a whiny crybaby. And then Achilles is a whiny crybaby and doesn't fight, and then a whole bunch of Greeks die because Achilles won't fight. Because apparently the Greeks suck unless Achilles is there. Like, if your whole army depends on one guy, you have way bigger problems. Like, y'all are freaking terrible. But regardless, Briseis is ostensibly the catalyst for that particular argument. And so, like I said, this is a first-person narrative told from the perspective of Briseis as being a slave in the Greek camp. And otherwise, it follows the story of the Iliad exactly. And we kind of witness these events mostly from Briseis' perspective. And because it's from Briseis' perspective, and because she's a camp slave, basically, she's not a soldier. She's not actually at the battlefield. And so one of the most interesting things is that all of the action of the Iliad actually takes place off stage. So the death of Patroclus, the death of Achilles, the death of Hector, all of that is done in like one line or 2 lines, definitely never larger than a paragraph. And that's because that's not really what this is about. It's about the consequences of those events and how it affects the Greeks that are her captors and how it affects her experience as a slave in the Greek camps. And so this is a difficult book to read in a lot of places, and not because Barker's writing is hard to get through. It's actually really evocative while being unintrusive, and I really like how she, having read the Iliad, how she intersperses like actual lines of poetry just in the prose, like actual lines from the Iliad just in the prose as normal, like when she talks about Achilles, sack of wine, or like when Achilles groans overpowered in all his power, that kind of stuff. That stuff ripped straight from the Iliad, where if you have not read that, you're not aware, but I like that that is there. It creates this kind of mythical quality to her prose, which serves perfectly. But it is hard to read because Briseis is a female slave, as are the other females that she interacts with, and, you know, the female slaves are not just to clean things. They are obviously are taken to bed, and some of those scenes are extremely difficult to read and uncomfortable. It's not weird and excessive the way it is when you hear me talk about weird sexy time stuff that just kind of like, why is this here? This is absolutely necessary to the experience of Briseis and the rest of the Trojan prisoners, but that does not make it any easier to read. And this is made all the more complicated by the portrayal of the Greeks here. So this is one of the most interesting portrayals of these Greek heroes that I've ever read, and it's maybe my favorite portrayal of Achilles and Patroclus.
Stack of wine.
Really in anything other than the actual Iliad. Because their relationship just kind of transcends what popular culture really wants it to be. And Achilles
Stack of wine.
is such a big baby. Like, he's literally like a giant baby, like that never grew up. He's such a crybaby. And has no impulse control and just is upset that his mom, you know, left him. And Patroclus is so reasonable and just infuriated with how knuckleheaded his friend is. And, you know, he was also forced to live with Achilles because he was fleeing a crime. So he was kind of like imprisoned, if you will. And he tries to make that connection with Briseis. And she's like, we are not the same, big guy. But Patroclus is also the one of the only ones who's kind to Briseis and to his own. But while saying this, he has his own Trojan prisoner who is his slave. And so it's just really hard because you like Patroclus, but at the same time, he also killed a whole bunch of Trojans. He also has taken slaves. And even though he's kind, like Briseis asks, like, can there be kindness with your captive, or is it just varying degrees of like brutality? It's an unpleasant experience to read a lot of this because you are torn in so many different ways, and I think that is a credit to Barker's story. And so Barker's constantly making this kind of comparison between the women and the men. The men go out and they fight, and it's all about this honor and, you know, glory, and the women are, by the men, not considered warriors, but they fight their own battles. They're kind of locked in battles of wills between other women who vie for being, you know, like rising above their station and having an heir to their, you know, the princes and the kings that they were once wives or mistress to, you know, before they were slaves, and the kind of cast aside nature of women who cannot produce a son for their husbands, especially if their husbands are of any import. And yet we also see what big baby cry baby I don't like these posters of me that the men are. This idea of, oh, they're gonna go win honor, but they can't go back on anything they said, even if they said it just because they were mad. And this idea of saving face and losing face, and it's just about being remembered and being seen and having stories told about you, and who can like take the most loot. It's just people, it's freaking pissing contest. It's just crossing the streams to see, oh, who has more crap. And we don't do that nowadays. Thank goodness that died back in, you know, the 1200 or 1600 BC when this happened. Thank goodness we no longer do any of that. And they're just so frustrating. The Greeks, like Agamemnon is still awful here. He's awful everywhere. He always has been. But this book managed to make me not like Odysseus, who's just a twerp in this. Like, I freaking hate Odysseus in this one. And I always like Odysseus, even when he's being tricky to the Trojans. But in this one, I hate him. I freaking hate him. And so you see these men just acting like spoiled children. And like I said before, like even the mistake that I slipped into it, even after Achilles isn't fighting and
Stack of wine.
all of these people are dying, And it's because Achilles is a big baby.
Back of wine.
But he's being a big baby because Agamemnon was being a big baby and had to give his war prize back and was mad that he didn't have another war prize. And so he took it from Achilles.
Back of wine.
Because Achilles dared to, like, talk back to him.
Back of wine.
Because they're both big babies, a whole bunch of people are dying. But no one blames either one of them. They blame Briseis because Briseis is the one that they were fighting over. So it's her fault, not these two giant babies. And it's just infuriating. It's just so infuriating. And it is very evocative of a lot of the big babies we see today, where it's somehow someone else's fault. Like, it's this person's fault. They don't like me. How dare they not like me? Well, it's because you're a douchebag. That's why they don't like you. It's not their fault that you're a douchebag. Have some accountability and personal responsibility, mayhaps. And the reason they're able to do this is because they've basically dehumanized all the slaves. We see so many times that they refer to Briseis as a prize, an it. Just like when they're trying to exchange it, when Agamemnon's trying to, like, win his, get Achilles to come back, they're always talking about the girl and the prize, like, he got my prize. And so it dehumanizes Briseis, and she's just here kind of having to deal with that because they never consider her feelings, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like, she lost. Like, this is just what is done. Like, it's Vae Victis, woe to the conquered.
Vae Victis!
Because to them, they are things. They are no different than any other kind of plunder to be traded and bargained for and, sold off. Like, that is their purpose. That is the entitlement of those ancient civilizations when they would sack a city. This is what was expected. And as it goes on, we see Briseis kind of struggle with her conflicting feelings about the people in the camp, like Patroclus, who is kind to her. And she talks about Achilles'
back of wine
beauty, but she never mentions it. She's being asked about it. She doesn't mention it because she has difficulty separating the absolute animal savagery and violence and terror that Achilles evokes.
Back of wine.
Despite the fact that he's probably the most beautiful person in the world. Like, how do you separate the beauty from the complete and utter danger and bloodthirstiness? As she is conflicted, because can you develop a fondness and a kind of love for people who are your captors, who literally own you? And so when the Greeks that she's like Patroclus, who is kind, and so she's kind of developed this quasi-fondness for him, when he's out fighting, she is rooting for him and the others who are kind to her, but she's rooting for them while they're murdering her countrymen. So she just has these conflicting loyalties that we may not understand, that she doesn't really understand, and it just makes for such a rich story. And in Achilles, we also see
back of wine.
And it's not just Achilles that explores this, but Achilles is the main and obvious one. We also see something that may hit close to home to many of us, it certainly did me, is this idea that what you are doing is self-destructive and what you are doing is unhelpful, and it's wrong, and it hurts the people around you, and it dishonors you, and you know that you shouldn't be doing it, and you desperately don't want to be acting this way, but you have no idea how to stop. You have no idea how to stop feeling the way you do, how to stop acting out the way you are. And we see Achilles like struggle through this because of these weird, bizarre, twisted kind of definitions of honor and valor and masculinity and manliness that these ancient Greek heroes and kings would have had. And so I really, really enjoyed this book. I was just captivated, like, the whole way. I was just fascinated by the aspects of the human psychology that it kind of explored. It is first person for the entire first part, and then in parts 2 and 3, we get some third-person perspectives from both Patroclus and Achilles.
Back of wine.
And I thought that was really, really well done, and it's kind of necessary to really get the whole experience of what's going on. It couldn't be done from just Briseis's POV. I do think for some reason, right at the end, because it follows past the Iliad, because the Iliad ends with Hector's death, or Hector's burial, not with Achilles' death. that happens afterwards. So it follows all the way through the sacking of Troy, and the horse isn't even mentioned. Like, the Trojan horse isn't even mentioned in it. For some reason, like, it felt like it ran about 10 pages too long. Like, I thought it was over and was kind of ready to be done. I thought everything that we were going to talk about and explore had been talked about and explored. And then it went on, 10, 15 pages that just dragged a little for me, that really hampered like the ending experience for me. I don't really know why. I think largely it felt like it was setting up the next book, which is called The Women of Troy, and just kind of continues from there. And I don't know if that is why, or if I just felt that was why. So I didn't love the last like 10, 15 pages of it, but it was short, it read very quickly, and I really, really loved just how uncomfortable it made me while just being absolutely, absolutely excellent. So on the Kingfin approval system, I give this book a superb, just really, really good. So different from what I know about most of the retellings that come out. Like, I'm so over like mythological retellings, because most of them are not even kind of interesting to me. Because I think this had something to offer the reader, as opposed to just being like, oh, look, this is that myth, but with a lady as the main character. And, or, oh, let's write some smutty fanfic about two mythological characters. Like, that's just not my thing. The emotions that this had like kind of roiling inside me was just really, really good. Out of 5 stars, I give this 5 stars easy, 5 stars all day. I definitely, if you are a fan of the Iliad, you should definitely read this. I think being a fan of the Iliad enhances your enjoyment of this, because you see it from you see events in a completely different light than you would have having read the Iliad. I do not think needing to read the Iliad is a requirement or prerequisite for this at all. As I said, most of the events happen like that and are off screen because they're not what is important to the story being told. Anyway, I am super excited to read The Women of Troy. If you have read Women of Troy, is it as good as Silence of the Girls, or is it kind of a step down? Should I read The Women of Troy, or should I, stop with this one? If you've read this, let me know in the comments, and let me know what you thought of this book as well. As always, guys, information about my Patreon and Discord is down in the description, and I'll see you next time, guys.